Returning to my hometown was never in my plans. But when my parents passed away, I had no choice. My duty was to sort out the house where I grew up, sign some papers, decide what to do with the property, and maybe even take one last walk around the yard before leaving for good. I wasn't exactly a nostalgic person, but that house meant everything to them. Only, when I got there, the house no longer existed. There wasn't a single wall standing, nothing. Just a vacant lot surrounded by rubble, HOA signs, and a ridiculous billboard advertising the future community leisure space. I stared at it for a long time, trying to process. The memory of the last time I saw my parents alive was still so fresh that I could visualize the porch, my father's rocking chair, my mother's garden. But now, it had all been reduced to a pile of dust and debris. When I was finally able to move, I went straight to the HOA office. It was a very modern building, the kind that looks like it was built with dirty money and the sheer desire to be annoying. I walked in and, of course, was greeted by her, the woman, the queen of suburban mediocrity herself, the nightmare of any neighborhood. Karen, with her starched hair and bored expression, barely looked up when I entered. She was sitting behind a counter full of pamphlets about community improvements, chewing gum as if it were the most important thing she had ever done in her life. "Can I help you?" she asked, in that voice of someone who has already decided that you are a nuisance before even knowing what you want. Help? The only thing she could help me with was not to lose control right then and there. "I want to know what happened to my parents' house," I said, trying to stay calm. She didn't even blink. "Address?" I gave her the address, and Karen, in no hurry at all, started typing on the computer, as if she were choosing a bad movie on Netflix and not checking the destruction of a home. After a few seconds, she clicked her tongue and said, "Ah, that property was demolished last week. It was abandoned, and the HOA decided to repurpose the space for something more useful for the community." Abandoned. That word made me see red. My parents hadn't even been dead a month, and this woman was talking as if their house was an old car dumped in a junkyard. I took a deep breath. I could break that counter and jump on her neck, but it wasn't worth it. I had another plan. A much better plan. Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. I was the county sheriff. And now, this fifth-rate association was going to deeply regret it. My immediate instinct was to pull that woman out from behind the counter and make her see what a monumental fuck-up she had just made. But years of experience as a sheriff have taught me that anger is a double-edged sword. If you know how to use it, it can cut your enemy. If you lose control, it cuts you. So instead of shouting or banging on the table, just smile. A cold, calculated smile that has made many a crook confess to a crime just for fear of what would come next. But Karen wasn't smart enough to notice. "Interesting," I murmured. She went back to chewing her gum as if the conversation was over, readying her hand to pick up her cell phone and ignore my existence. Good. Even better. The safer and more comfortable she was, the greater the impact when everything fell apart. I turned my back and left. Outside, I took a deep breath. The air in that small town no longer smelled of childhood and tranquility. It smelled of the destruction of a house that should never have been touched. First and foremost, I needed proof. And fortunately, being county sheriff meant that I had contacts in all the right places. I picked up my phone and called the city records department. "I need all the demolition permits approved in the last month," I asked. On the other end of the line, one of the registry office employees laughed. "Since when are you interested in bureaucracy?" "Since someone decided to destroy my parents' house without permission." His tone changed instantly. "Give me a few minutes. I'll get the documents." While I waited, I went back to the land where the house used to stand. I walked among the rubble, kicking a piece of wood here, pushing a broken tile there. All that remained were fragments of a lifetime, scattered like garbage. A wave of anger surged through my chest. They hadn't even bothered to clean up properly. My phone vibrated. "Guess what?" The employee's voice had a slightly nervous tone. "There's no demolition permit for that address, The information didn't surprise me, but knowing that I was right only made my blood boil even more. Are you sure? Positive. The last demolition permit was for a commercial building on the main street. Nothing to do with your case. Your house shouldn't have been touched. I clutched my cell phone in my hand. What if someone forged it? That's difficult. We don't approve anything without protocol. If they had tried to pass something off as a fake, it would have been recorded. In other words, Karen didn't even bother trying to cover it up. She just decided, out of the blue, that my house should disappear. This made everything much more interesting. I went to the police station, filed a formal complaint, and went after the demolition team. It didn't take long to find the company responsible. The owner was a balding man with a thin beard and a tired expression. As soon as I entered his office, I noticed his nervousness. I swear I only did the job because the HOA made sure everything was all right, he snapped, before I could even ask him any questions. Do you have any paperwork? Any signed authorization? He cleared his throat, opened a drawer, and pulled out a crumpled envelope. He handed me the papers with sweaty hands. Looking quickly, I saw that the only signature there was Karen's. No permission from the town hall. No notice to the owners. Nothing at all. I almost laughed. She didn't just demolish the house illegally. She did it in writing. I left the office already dialing the number for the county attorney's office. I have a very serious violation of municipal law here, I said, barely holding back the satisfaction. I can send you the documents right now. The lawyer on the other end was silent for a moment. This could land you in jail. I know that. I'll prepare the legal procedures, and I'll prepare the disgrace of the HOA. The first part of my plan was complete. I had the evidence. Now it was time to make that woman swallow every word she said to me, and hopefully make her spit out that disgusting gum along with it. If there's one thing I've learned over the years as a sheriff, it's that amateur criminals always make the same mistake. They think they're above the rules. And Karen was exactly that kind of criminal. I knew that if I walked into that HOA office and threw the evidence in her face, all that would happen would be a new wave of lame excuses and maybe "I'll call my lawyer," said, with the arrogance of someone who thinks they can escape the consequences. Number I wanted more. I wanted her to feel the ground disappear from under her feet before she even realized she was sinking. So instead of going back to the HOA, I went to City Hall. Karen could be bossy, annoying, and clearly thought she was the queen of the neighborhood, but even a queen needs a castle. And her castle was a ridiculous power scheme within the HOA scheme that only worked because the people around it were too lazy to question it. If I was going to take her down, it had to be from the inside out. I want an official meeting with the HOA board, I announced as soon as I stepped into the city's administrative offices. The site secretary, a thin, tired man who clearly just wanted to get the day over with, raised an eyebrow. Any specific reason? I'd say destruction of property and falsification of documents are good enough reasons. The mention of crimes made the man slightly more attentive. I can put you on the agenda. Good. Do it as soon as possible. 2 hours later, there I was, sitting in the HOA's small meeting room, staring at a handful of residents who were only there because, at some point in their lives, they were naive enough to think that joining the association's board would be a good idea. And, of course, in the middle of them, sitting as if she owned the world, was her. Karen wore that usual artificial smile, the one that seemed stuck on her face as if it were incapable of expressing any emotion other than empty superiority. "Well, well, well," she said, crossing her arms. "Our sheriff has decided to get involved in community affairs?" I felt like ripping that smile off her face, but I held back. "I only decided to get involved because it seems you decided you could destroy my house without permission." The mood in the room changed. Some of the other council members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. Clearly, no one there had been informed that the HOA was now also acting as a clandestine demolition company. Karen, however, continued to pretend that nothing had gone wrong. "The house was abandoned," she said, rolling her eyes. The HOA has the right to intervene when a property becomes a risk to the aesthetics of the community. The HOA has the right to intervene, yes, I agreed, keeping my voice calm, but only after following legal procedures. You know, the boring ones that require permits and approval from the city. She didn't say anything. I smiled. Oh, wait, I continued. You didn't get those licenses, did you? Because I checked. And do you know what I found out? That you simply signed a piece of paper on your own and gave the order to demolish the house without any approval. The silence in the room was almost palpable. Karen opened her mouth to try to argue, but before she could, I threw the documents I'd taken from the demolition company on the table. Do you want to deny that this is your signature? She looked at the papers. For the first time, her expression trembled a little, but it was Karen, and Karen would never admit she was wrong. Well, that was a bureaucratic error, a misunderstanding. We followed the guidelines we thought were right. How convenient, I retorted, pretending to be surprised. Because, you see, I've already informed the town hall and the county attorney's office. They don't call illegal destruction of property a bureaucratic error. They call it a crime. One of the council members sniffled, visibly worried. Karen, you didn't mention anything about a lack of a license. She cast a sharp glance in his direction. Because it was an irrelevant detail. We're trying to improve the community. Improving it with criminal proceedings? I asked, arching an eyebrow. Another board member looked at her, then at the documents, and let out a long sigh. This could wipe out the entire HOA. It was at that moment that Karen realized what was happening. She wasn't just losing to me. She was about to lose control of the thing she loved most, the HOA. Because no HOA survives when the residents themselves realize that the system can harm them rather than protect them. And now, with the mayor's office involved, with council members seeing the danger, and with a county sheriff willing to make a fuss, the only thing left for Karen was despair. She stood up, trying to regain control of the narrative. This is all an exaggeration. The sheriff is clearly trying to cause confusion in order to smear us. I didn't even have to reply. The council members themselves were already exchanging looks of panic and frustration. The tide was turning. And Karen, for the first time, was beginning to realize that perhaps she had dug too deep a hole. The silence in the HOA room was deafening. The board members were completely bewildered, their expressions a mixture of fear and confusion. They had gotten themselves into something much bigger than they had imagined, and reality was knocking at the door relentlessly. Karen still tried to keep her posture, but her tense body and shaking hands betrayed the growing panic inside her. She knew she couldn't run away from it any longer. There were no more words to cover up the monumental mistake she had made. The illegal destruction of my parents' house wasn't just a violation of property rights. It was a crime. And now, with the irrefutable evidence on the table, she had two options: admit her fault or fight to the end. But I knew, and she knew, that things would never be the same for her again. "You can't do this, Sheriff," Karen said, trying to sound authoritative, but her voice sounded fragile. She was desperate, trying to save what was left of her image and the empire she had built with dirty hands and no remorse. "We were doing this for the good of the community. People can't see it as a threat, as you're trying to paint it." I remained calm. There was no longer any need to shout or use aggressive tactics. The situation was already out of control for her, and now I just needed to make sure that the weight of the law fell on her shoulders. "You don't understand, Karen," I began, my voice firm but not angry. "This isn't about the community. This is about you abusing the power you thought you had, and now you're going to pay for it." She tried to argue once more, but time was already running out for her. Karen's last attempt was to get more people involved. Attempts to plant seeds of doubt in those who were still afraid to mess with her. But that didn't work anymore. I had done my job, and the council members were beginning to realize that they were at a dead end. "Karen," said one of the council members, a middle-aged man who seemed to be in shock, "there's no denying it. The sheriff is right. This is all very wrong. We need to take this forward." She looked at him, her face a mixture of incredulity and anger, but there was nothing she could do. The tide had already turned. And so, that house of cards she had built over the years began to crumble. My parents' house, destroyed without permission, was just the beginning. I knew the entire HOA was rotten, but now, with all the evidence gathered, the impact would be much greater. Not only would Karen fall, but the entire structure of the HOA would be dismantled. The news spread quickly. The county attorney's office received the documents and immediately began legal proceedings. The city records department confirmed that no demolition permit had been applied for or approved. Even the company responsible for the demolition was called to testify, and the owner, who had previously been nervous, had no choice but to confirm everything. He knew he could be held responsible too, but the truth was stronger than any attempt to escape. Over the next few days, Karen tried to defend herself, calling in her lawyer and making public statements, trying to turn the story into a big conspiracy against her. But nothing worked. The evidence was irrefutable, and when the city announced that the HOA would undergo a full audit, the end was near. The trial was a spectacle. Karen, once the queen of the community, was now on the stand. She no longer had that arrogant posture, that forced smile. She was lost, desperately trying to maintain a facade that was already falling apart in front of everyone. The council members, once submissive to her, were now center stage, with their own fates at stake. Some tried to distance themselves from Karen, others tried to defend her actions, but no one could erase what had happened. With each passing day, the case gained more media attention, and Karen was finally unmasked as the fraudster she had always been. I was there the whole time, watching from afar, but always certain that nothing she tried would make a difference. She had stepped on my territory, on my family. Now, the only thing left for her to do was to pay for her mistakes. Finally, after weeks of tension and hearings, the verdict was given. Karen was convicted. She received a prison sentence, as well as being heavily fined for the violations and damage caused. And for the HOA, what was left was collapse. The association was dissolved. The community was now beginning to reorganize, without the weight of the corruption and arbitrariness that it represented. I wasn't there to see Karen being led away in handcuffs, but the relief was palpable, not just for me, but for everyone who had suffered under that woman's authoritarian rule. The HOA system was brought down, and the city could finally breathe again. And what about my parents' house? With the end of the HOA, the land was returned to the family, and I could finally bury the pain of that loss. I couldn't give back the life my parents had, but at least now I knew that what had been done was irreversible for Karen and all those who had taken advantage of her greed. I went back to my job as sheriff. My mission had been accomplished. Justice had been done, and, for Karen, impunity was a thing of the past. She was now in a prison she had built herself, and the town could finally begin to heal. And me? I only needed one thing, to make sure that no one ever dared to step on the people I loved again. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a like and a comment.